Thanks for having us up here. We are going to talk about the incredible lift and the incredible job of covering this historic election with some of our local reporters. So I'm going to let the journalists and reporters introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who they are, what organization they represent, and what made them want to be journalists in the first place. Would you like to kick us off, Alex?
I will. Is this on? Okay. I work in radio, as everyone can tell by how I know how to use this mic. My name is Alex. I cover Portland city politics for Oregon Public Broadcasting here in Portland. And you asked kind of how we got into journalism. I like to tell stories. I think a big reason I cover, or was drawn to cover politics, was because I never really felt like political reporting was accessible to me. It felt like it was kind of for folks who understood things maybe more about how systems worked. And so I've always wanted to be able to act as a translator to people who don't have the time to study government in college or don't have the time to understand how these things function, to explain the basics as to why decisions being made in City Hall impact someone who doesn't have time to pay attention. So, Taylor.
I'm Taylor. Hello. Okay, great. Taylor Griggs. I'm a reporter with the Portland Mercury. I cover a lot of things. Primarily, I do a lot of transportation and infrastructure coverage, but during the election, I was covering politics in City Hall and the government transition. And I've always liked to write, I think, tell stories, but I think my passion for journalism came from disrupting the idea of objectivity that is so prevalent in media and kind of sharing, there's different ways to tell stories and include different people who aren't always represented. And I also like to kind of break down maybe boring or complicated things into ways that aren't boring and make, interesting. So.
Well, hello and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shane Dixon Kavanaugh. I am currently the Portland City Hall reporter at the Oregonian, which is the daily newspaper here in Portland. I've served in this role for about 4.5 years now. In prior iterations of my journalism career, I've been a crime and criminal justice reporter, business reporter, national correspondent, national security reporter. I've worn many hats over the years. I will have to say that covering local politics and government has been my favorite beat in my professional career. I'm a journalist, I think, in part because I'm using subjective I statements here, but I feel as though I possess a boundless curiosity, so it's pretty cool. I get to be paid to be curious and to share with folks and people in the broader public what I learn and stories that are relevant to people's lives. And working for a daily paper here in Portland too is deeply meaningful and gratifying, in part because it has deepened my sort of connection to a sense of place and community. And I really enjoy kind of that back and forth between being a journalist and interfacing and connecting with the broader public.
And I forgot to introduce myself in case somebody came in after. I was on a panel earlier. My name is Maya Harris, and I run a journalism and research project called Rose City Reform that tracks specifically the reform process. So I want to move into our first question for the group, and we're kind of going to let everybody say a few words, and then feel free to jump in if you have a follow-up. We're going to keep it to just a few questions to kind of have a deeper discussion, and then we're going to leave some room for questions from the audience. So we have heard today about the incredible lift from the city to roll this out within a limited timeline, and I want everybody to remember that this was also a time crunch for the media, right? The media, I think there was a survey recently that came out that said that about 61% of voters got their information about ranked choice voting from the media. So not only do these reporters have to explain a complicated and new system, and I don't mean complicated as a negative thing, but this is complex. We changed a lot of stuff, and it's important to explain it. But then these reporters have to cover and explain over 100 individual races. And so I am curious, when you look back at this experience of covering the historic 2024 election, there were so many things that were different, but what stood out to you as most different compared to the races you've covered in the past? And this may take a while. So we started with you, Alex, before. So Shane, why don't we start with you?
Oh my. Well, I think it was just the scale of change that was taking place all at once. I mean, we were not only completely rewriting Portland's form of government, but also our voting system, election process. And then on top of that, Maya mentioned, I mean, we had over 100 candidates running for Portland City Council seats and then also for mayor. So we were having also a complete turnover of elected officials that we had to sort of attempt to do our best to vet and cover and approach. So I think it's just sort of this, the scale, the intensity of the overall transformation. So not only were we covering campaigns, but we were also making our best effort, my best effort, to try to explain to Portlanders, even though an overwhelming number of people voted for this new form of government and election system 2 years prior, really starting to drill down into the nitty-gritty details of what does that actually mean? What does that look like? So we're talking about the form of government change. And also, just to remind folks here, I think you all probably know this, we were dealing with not one form of ranked choice voting, but two forms of ranked choice voting. So an added layer there, complexity, not in a pejorative way, but just a lot to sort of unpack, trying to make sure that voters were and the public were well informed and well engaged and well equipped to try this new system and process out for the first time.
Taylor?
Yeah, when people started to first run for election, this was in maybe August of 2023, I kind of thought, given the other reporting I'd done about the charter reform and what the election would look like, I just envisioned people looking at their ballots, and I was like, how many people do you think are going to run? And making estimates. It was way more than I think I thought, but I suspected it would be a lot. So I figured it's important to kind of start tracking them early, and we did. And I have a very small team that I work with at the Mercury. It's just me and another person as the news team. So we knew we were going to be in trouble if we didn't get on it early, and we sent people emails with questions, checked the site when they announced their candidacies, and tried to keep up with it that way. Maya was also doing that, and it was really, her site was extremely helpful for resources about the candidates. So yeah, that was just huge. I mean, so much different than anything I've ever covered. And yeah, I mean, but it made it difficult to know, what other room there is for other reporting. So they were reporting about the candidates, especially about the people who were current commissioners at that time. Most of them were running for mayor. And then, if it was hard to track kind of the more fine details of everything, as I would have liked to, but I think determining what information will be important to voters was important, and maybe will evolve as we continue to cover these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most shocking thing was the number of candidates. In preparing for this, I realized I might have blacked out a little bit of the trauma of trying to organize covering this election last year, and it's all kind of coming back to me now. But a big piece of it, I mean, usually during an election cycle, newsrooms are doing profiles on candidates, really getting to know campaigns and candidates and their staff, and there's issues. And with so many candidates and only, over 100 people running for office, only me covering them, it would just be impossible to equitably cover the majority of folks running. And so we had to kind of make a decision to step back from these in-depth profiles and kind of features, and be able to cover and differentiate between the different candidates through questionnaires, through whatever that might be, but focus more on just the systemic changes that Taylor and Shane have talked about, and what that looks like in practice, how it's kind of messy, what the unanswered questions are, being able to zoom out a little bit more felt more useful. But it's, I would have loved to have spent more time educating the public on these different folks, but challenging.
What about, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I was going to add that I do feel like the candidates and different organizations did a pretty good job of organizing themselves and being available to the public. There were lots of different coalitions of people who frequently held or attended public events. So I think something that was different, I just was around candidates all the time. I mean, I'd go to a event, there'd be 20 candidates, me, another reporter, and like one civilian. So I mean, it wasn't ideal for the candidates, but I was constantly meeting people. And it's the same, a lot of the times it was the same people. So we'll probably talk about that later, expanding the coverage. But that was, I've never spoken to this many candidates. And now the counselors, I think we have a different relationship as well.
I'm curious, during sort of the course of the day, we have touched on this new dynamic of candidate alliances, and in Portland, we had many different words for candidates that were either running on the same slate or sort of, we call them values alliance. I think we used candidate colleague or colleague candidate. There were a lot of ways to try and describe these candidates who were running on shared values. So can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe Alex, if was this something that you noticed that was different to compared to previous cycles?
Just the way people were running.
Yeah, the campaign style, really, the strategies.
Certainly. I mean, there was little to no negative campaigning that we really saw. It was a lot of partnerships between like-minded candidates in districts, kind of using the intent of ranked choice voting and district representation to hopefully, partnering together would be successful for them going off of that angle. But we saw that in a number of different districts, and it seemed for a lot of the people, it seemed to be pretty successful. You didn't have strategists and kind of deep-pocketed donors putting a lot of money towards negative campaigning either, because I think no one was sure kind of what impact that would have. It was such an experiment that it did seem like a lot of people were just kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing what stuck, and there are a lot of lessons to take from that. So yeah, certainly a different way of campaigning. And that's carried on to the way that a lot of these counselors have shown up in City Hall.
I'm curious if you saw a difference between the multi-winner races, the council races, and the mayoral race where there was a single winner in terms of the level of alliance building or the level of negativity. Would any of you like to address that?
I'm happy to address that a little bit. Yeah, I think there was certainly, I would say, a noticeable difference between how people campaigned in the mayor's race which was just sort of instant runoff ranked choice voting, versus the proportional representation within the district council races. I mean, the district council races in part, I mean, it wasn't a zero-sum game, right? There wasn't going to be a single winner. There were going to be multi-winners. And so there, I think that really disincentivizes negative campaigning and mudslinging and what have you. In addition to that, I think there was also just kind of this, I don't know, overall sort of civic excitement around all of the candidates. Many of the candidates who are running for office were first-time candidates. I mean, these weren't professional politicians, and everybody was embarking on this grand experiment. And I think there was just a real level of sort of excitement and camaraderie that that materialized through that process. In terms of the mayor's race, I mean, by and large, I would say, even though we did have, this was our first time having a ranked choice voting contest, I mean, among the leading candidates in the race, I mean, I think there were 19 candidates who were running for mayor, but there were 5 or 6 who were sort of leading contenders. And I mean, it's sort of especially near the end when it got a little more competitive, it was very similar to how you would have seen a normal political race unfold, with the leading candidates sort of taking their shots at each other, large outside independent expenditure groups going negative on candidates that they didn't like. I mean, and interestingly enough, and a pretty a curious innovation, I think, that we had here in Portland too, is that we actually had an entire sort of campaign that was about not ranking a particular candidate for office as opposed to supporting somebody, but it was, don't vote for this guy, these 3 people are cool.
So from this record-breaking candidate pool, then came our new government. And I'm curious what you as reporters are observing about the new government and the new city hall, our new legislative body, our new executive mayor. What are you observing about the new government that is different than how City Hall used to work? And we'll start with you, Taylor.
I think there's a lot that's different. Like I mentioned earlier, just the number of people on city council makes it so that people can actually have conversations and even relationships with them in a much different way than previous. I mean, I've been able to meet up with the councilors and have chats in a way that I would never could have imagined doing in the past. And I think because they came from all over the city, they had built-in relationships with people in their districts, and hopefully they feel empowered to go to talk to them as well. Something that I think is really interesting, and they're still trying to figure out, I think, some of the details about everything. Some of these meetings have gone on really long because there's a lot of public comment being made, and I think that this was because throughout the election, the idea that people would have a voice in this new form of government was something that was really discussed by all the candidates and by the charter reform proponents. So now they kind of expect that, and they're trying to figure out exactly how to work it. And Alex Zielinski wrote a really good article about that recently that was very interesting. Yeah, I think, I mean, there's so many different things that are happening, and it's hard to say exactly how it's going to play out in terms of actual policy, but when you're watching the meetings, it seems different. But I'm interested in how that plays out.
Alex, your name was invoked. I believe that means you get to.
Well, I will say there's a phrase that you hear maybe every 5 minutes in City Hall, and that's City Council is building the plane as they're flying it. I'm like holding back an eye roll because I've heard it so many times, but it's not incorrect. I mean, you see this panel of 12 brand new city councilors. A lot of them have never been in government before, or if they have, they've been in the old form of government, which really doesn't translate as much to the new form. And they are trying to pass policy and fulfill the promises that they were elected to do, while also not really having rules of order around how council meetings should operate. when public testimony should come to play, how long these meetings should run, how many meetings they should have. They're short-staffed, and so it's hard in terms of the council clerk who operates and kind of oversees the meetings. And so they're juggling a lot of things at once. And I think there's pressure both to deliver on kind of some of the early policy ideas that they have and ran on, and also show that this new form of government is working, right? Because they all kind of ran on a promise too that, hey, we are the right leaders to start this new chapter. We will model it in a way that is effective and democratic, and also will pass all these other policies, at the same time. And I think there is a bit of a lag. We just had our first 90 days or first 100 days of the new government, and everyone kind of put out lists of like, this is what we've achieved in the first 3 months. And it's like, no one's really done anything. And that's totally, I think, expected because they are trying to get the system up and running. I think you expect more from a council that's been around for a minute. Okay, what have you achieved in the first few months of office? But I think just like not totally breaking apart at the seams is kind of is where folks are at for now.
Shane, when you were on the podcast that I host called Stump Talk, you talked about first day of school vibes at City Hall. Can you talk a little bit about that general vibe of just kind of, I think you described it as both excitement and sort of nervous energy, and if is that still ongoing, or are we losing some of the first day of school vibes?
Yeah, I think as we're about to have a proposed budget come out in 2 weeks, where the mayor is trying to figure out a way to close a $93 million deficit in the general fund, which is going to require some really difficult choices and likely cuts around sort of key service areas and things that are important to the public. I think we've kind of gotten out of the first days of school excitement that was certainly an energy and a feeling that was very palpable inside City Hall during, I don't know, maybe the first 2 months or so. But I mean, now this council, not just with the budget, but with other pretty significant sort of policy debates and discussions and decisions. I mean, that's all sort of coming down the pike here really fast. And to Alex's point as well, that is all happening while folks have not entirely sort of figured out how this thing is going to run, how it ought to run, and trying to put rules and systems and policies in place and testing those out and seeing what's working and not working. So you have all of that going on while the real sort of issues that have been confronting the city for a number of years are still there, very much so. Public has a lot of demands and concerns around, many issues. So there's just an awful lot happening and converging sort of simultaneously.
So I want to talk a little bit about something that we heard referenced several times today about the power structure at City Hall being disrupted. So I'm curious what you as reporters are observing in terms of, this is a system that was intended to produce more representation for more groups, for more groups, for more voters to have a seat at the table. With that in mind, who has gained power at City Hall? Who has power, and are we seeing a change in who gets a seat at the table at City Hall? I'm losing track of the order, but I feel like it's either Alex or Taylor.
I
You
can
flip a
jump in.
coin.
Well, I mean, I think there's difference between who has power in elected office versus what voices, what coalitions of people have power in City Hall. And I'll speak to that piece because I think that's a big change. I mean, we have, as has been mentioned before, like the most diverse city council in our history. You know, huge age range, different people representing different races, different economic backgrounds, different experiences, and you have people at the table who have, you know, we're a school teacher, we're not really you know, on track to, on like the classic kind of moneyed track to get into politics. And so, and we have a pretty wide diversity. I mean, it's always funny talking about Portland politics because everyone's a Democrat. That the spectrum is just within that, on that line. And so we have, you know, moderates, progressives. We have like 4 socialists on city council, which we've never had before. And there's caucuses being built. There's 6 on city council. 6 of the most progressive folks have formed a caucus that is called the Peacock Progressive Caucus, and you know, they're meeting to support each other and help each other and figure out how to use the system to their benefit. And I think you're seeing folks. I mean, on the more kind of like liberal side of the scale, I think having more of a voice than they have in Portland for a while. At the same time, the like classic kind of power brokers in Portland, whether that's unions, business leaders, you know, developers, like they aren't really going anywhere. They still have their finger on the pulse. I think a lot like city councilors, they are learning, figuring out how to fly this new plane, and where to, you know, how to levy their power. But I do see, I mean, the intent of charter reform was to bring more people to the table, and I think that has, through this new council, has felt like a success, or like it's happening.
Want to just go in order, Taylor?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's interesting and may not be possible at this point to differentiate between the things that people at City Council are talking about versus the policy that will actually be implemented in the future, you know, whenever that is, and what will show up in the budget. Something that has been really noticeable and notable to me is that, so we have policy committees that the councilors were speaking of. I think there's 8 of them, correct? And they're on a variety of topics. They meet every other week. And they have different styles of leadership. So some, I mean, but there's pretty much every councilor is either a chair or a vice or co-chair of a committee. So they can bring issues to the table that they may have kind of been interested in before they were on council that have really never been talked about before. For example, there was a conversation at the Environment Committee a few weeks, or maybe this was longer ago, about renewable fuels, and they presented it in a way that was kind of skeptical of this program that the city has run for 20 years now and has kind of, you know, seen as scientifically true and helpful. And there are voices being brought to these committee meetings, especially, that have never really had the backing of City Council in that way. Now, will it result in anything? I don't know. And I don't know if people will think that it matters to have the voice if it doesn't result in any tangible policy. So I think that remains to be seen, but it's definitely a different power structure in some regards, but I just don't know how it'll play out exactly.
I think what I would add, if we're just looking at how the 2024 elections played out and who the people were that got elected to serve on the Portland City Council, it's hard for me to think of any of the 12 candidates that didn't receive significant support from sort of institutional players and actors, whether that was labor or business or progressive organizations or social justice groups. So I think you have that kind of mix, and we have and Alex mentioned that everybody's sort of a Democrat on the Portland City Council, but there's still quite a lot of ideological diversity, and I certainly think that the people who are sort of showing up and getting a platform and voice at council, you know, are representatives of a lot of those different sort of institutional players and organizations. What I'm very interested in seeing as this new system matures and as we're given more time, I'm not sure how familiar folks are with our previous form of government, but we had our commission form of government where our city council members were primarily in charge of running the bureaucracy and administration. And you know, constituent services being out in districts and communities was not a priority. It was something that didn't happen very often. And now we've got 3 representatives for each council district. I think that is a huge opportunity and, you know, something that's going to be very different going forward. And I see all of these council members committing a lot of time to being in district, to talking to constituents, to everyday Portlanders and people. And I think the other sort of important thing is if you're looking at, so for instance, East Portland, east of I-205 has been sort of historically a part of the city that has been underrepresented and ignored. And I think we've also seen a lack of a depreciation in civic engagement historically because of that. So I'm very interested to see with this new system and with time, because this is all going to take time too, right? You don't just flip on the light switch and everything changes. But you know, in terms of people getting a seat at the table or feeling heard or feeling engaged, I'm going to be looking for how East Portlanders in particular are responding to this new form of government, and you know how that level of civic engagement might evolve or change with time.
So I want to be mindful of time. We've got about 10 minutes, so we can fill it with another question, but I want to see if the audience has some questions, and then we'll go there. I already see one question.
All right.
All right.
Hi guys, I'm Brian Smith of Tribal Democracy Project. My question for you all is more in the context of reporting with electoral reforms, particularly new electoral reforms and lessons learned. My feeling was that I do have a bias, but also I felt like there was a bias in the media, particularly around Portland, that was anti-ranked choice voting. And I'm just going to go to one headline from the Oregonian right after the election. It was something, Portland's ranked choice debut causes voter engagement to crater. I've had a couple days here with a lot of expert testimony from some leading mathematicians showing that wasn't true. Overall, collectively, do you think there are lessons learned on how, for future reporting on stuff like this for other folks, there are lessons learned to kind of take from this?
I'll let you go first, Shane, since the Oregonian's name was invoked.
Yeah, I certainly, I appreciate the feedback, and there's certainly, I've heard a lot from especially proponents of electoral reforms that the coverage had felt or come across as, critical and or, skeptical of these new voting systems. And I think what I would say to that is that part of the job here is we vote, voters voted to create these new forms of government and systems. And so it was part of my job to really rigorously examine, how ranked choice voting has played out in other parts of the country, recognizing the fact that with proportional representation in particular, while there is, a body of evidence and research of how it's worked, it's been primarily in other parts of the world and not the United States. I mean, outside of Cambridge, Massachusetts, proportional representation hasn't been used widely here. So similar, so we were, applying, I think a high level of sort of, rigorous inquiry, looking at academic studies that show both the potential benefits of ranked choice voting and different kinds of ranked choice voting, and then also where there have been some potential pitfalls or areas where ranked choice voting has been shown to raise other sort of questions or potential concerns. I mean, I think one area in particular is that studies have shown, and we certainly saw it in East Portland, that at least in the first few years of a ranked choice voting system, and part of the broader idea here is that we want to sort of uplift, historically underrepresented communities, have more civic engagement from those folks. But generally, communities of color and low-income people have across the board in the United States have had a harder time engaging with ranked choice voting systems, at least in the first few years in which they're implemented. And we sort of saw something similar happen here in Portland as well.
I think I will jump on. I think that some of the data that Shane's reporting was tapping into was correct. It did seem like there were less folks engaging in ranked choice voting in East Portland. The numbers were lower. I think it's just always important to contextualize that. And I don't remember the story at all, really, but I'm not bashing the story. But I think what's hard in seeing that headline and seeing the way it's framed is that maybe it's saying that people in East Portland don't care about democracy, or that they aren't interested in participating, or otherizing an already otherized part of the city. And I just think that contextualizing all of that with, okay, here is maybe why this part of the city might not be as engaged, and who's responsible for that, and is it pointing the finger at people who have felt so long ignored and underrepresented, or who maybe didn't even know how to get information about what the change of government was, or confused. I mean, a lot of change is confusing. I think it's just always adding more context to that that we can do as reporters, and going forward certainly is on my mind.
Do we have any more questions for the reporters? Okay, I see Chris over there.
Thanks. Chris Hughes at the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. I'm wondering, given that there were so many candidates running, obviously I think it was you all talked about how hard it was just to know, or to report up front on who they all were, where they were all coming from. I'm curious, from your perspective, as the campaigns went on, if there were clearer frontrunners in those really crowded races. Because in the results, at least in the district races, there were like 8-ish serious folks in each of those districts. Was that becoming evident to you as reporters working on those campaigns, or was that something that only became clear as results were coming out?
Great question. Taylor, you want to go first?
Yeah, I was definitely doing a lot of hypothesizing about who was coming out front. I think that there were a lot of questions about how much name recognition would matter, because there were some candidates who are now counselors who were previously elected officials, whether that was on Portland City Council or Multnomah Commission. I think that it was, the results were different in some ways than I anticipated, and yeah, there was it's very interesting to see how it played out. I will say, just because it's somewhat related, I mean, the way that the media, or profiling people, giving them kind of a platform, would have elevated their rise to a certain level. I don't know how much that played into it, but I think that it's interesting to see kind of what institutions uplifted candidates to the point where they were able to succeed, and if there's a way in the future, given how many candidates there were, and there probably or definitely won't be so many in the future, that there could be more equitable, or evenly distributed reporting across districts on candidates who did not have that same kind of institutional support.
And do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to add aside from, I think just seeing, I think we were tallying how many endorsements from different organizations and different groups or different coalitions that people were in, that each candidate had over time. And it seemed that the folks who collected, the most endorsements usually kind of came out on top. Of course, at the same time, fundraising, we have campaign limits here, but tracking kind of, I think we think about serious candidates as people who really put in the legwork to raise money. And so that kind of tracked. But still, an election night, it was a crapshoot. I mean, I think we always, I know in our newsroom, we pre-write a lot of election night stories, and we had like 30 options for each, it was a lot. So, yeah, it was hard to read the tea leaves this time around.
I'll just add on a personal note that I researched all candidates in extreme detail and put all their endorsements up, and you couldn't go any deeper. And I had a informal bet with somebody I knew, this would be confidential, and we both kind of covered the election, and I lost so bad. So, it didn't really matter. I mean, to your point, Chris, it was really difficult to predict. That was the complexity and the beauty of all seats up at once and a proportional method. Like, it really was not a preset outcome, and I think we all lived it, right? I think we had another question. Shane, do you have anything you want to add to the last question?
No, we can go on to the next question.
All right. Who else do we? Oh, great. Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Nina. I'm with APIs for Civic Empowerment in California. And one of the biggest threats we see to democracy in our state is the incredible amount of money in politics. We see corporations, tech companies, real estate essentially buying elections. And so I'm curious from your standpoint as reporters, how you see this different system impacting the role of money in politics, especially on the IE side.
I'm happy to take
Go
a
ahead.
first crack at that question. So one of the good things that we have in Portland here is a public financing system. However, what we saw in 2024 was that public financing system was not fully funded, or let's say funded adequately enough for candidates to have sufficient sort of funding on their own. Not so much in city council races, but really in the mayor's race. And there was a decision kind of made that there was going to be sort of a greater share of money going toward the city council candidates. So the mayor's race, the actual candidates were able to not raise a significant amount of money on their own and relied heavily on independent expenditure campaigns. But even with our public financing system, we had a high level of IE campaigns coming from labor, from business, and from progressive groups. I mean, there was a ton of money, outside money, that was sloshing around in this election. Sorry, sloshing probably sounds a little harsh, but no, but there was a lot of money in this election, and a lot of it coming from outside interest groups.
And I think
Wanna weigh in?
more than we've seen in the past. I think there was a void that a lot of IEs saw to fill because of the limits with campaign financing.
And the high number of candidates.
And the high number of
and
candidates.
trying to
And
help voters understand.
Sure. Yeah. And so I think that played a huge role in this election cycle in a way that I didn't totally anticipate, and only expect it to become a bigger factor in the coming next year's election.
I will say that not all the candidates who raised among the most in the small donors program won. So it's interesting to see, how that plays out. You can donate from any part of the city, so how that translates to district-based voting was interesting to see.
All right, I think that's all we have time for. I want to say a big thank you, big round of applause for our reporters. Thank you. We can't do democracy without them, so support them, please.